the broken window fallacy in Venezuela. Today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
The broken window economic theory, this comes from the 19th century French economist Frédéric Bastiat, and he explains that many times when you have this particular spending on repairing or investing on something that was already damaged, he explains that at the long run, that doesn't generate GDP output, a positive GDP output, compared to what most economists, and actually today many economists, think that is investing, reinvesting on repairing damage on a particular dire situation for the economy. Basically, for many economists, especially back on the day, they say that when you have, let's say, a recession on a particular economy, a kid, you should send some kids with rocks, with stones, that they will start smashing windows from different businesses and residences and that kind of thing. And afterwards, the owner of such properties, they will be obliged to go to the, window repair shop or the glass shop, something like that. And they will be needing to, replace the broken window. And of course, that generates economic activity because, of course, the property, the owner of the property, he needs to spend money on that particular thing. And the people who repair the glass, the windows, the curtain, of course, they are going to have some income, some revenue, and that will generate positive GDP. And of course, that's a fallacy for the economy that still today is applied. On this particular example of the broken window, what happened is that the particular owner of such businesses and properties and that kind of thing, they have, let's say, savings, and probably they will use those savings either for reinvest in their own businesses or their own properties, or they just will spend them on themselves. I mean, probably go with their family to a fancy restaurant, take a trip, buy some new clothing, things like that. Well, so this is a mistake, a fallacy that affects a bunch of economies worldwide and is reflected on public spending. We already know in economics that when the private spending is way more profitable and productive, that's the most important thing for the economic output rather than public spending. Why? And of course, it's an easy explanation, it's just about incentives. When you are the private owner, of course, this particular capital, in order to invest, you're either gonna be as smart as you can, hopefully, regarding this particular investing and this particular spending, because you're either gonna reinvest on your particular production activity. Let's say, for instance, let's say you are a white-collar professional, you're gonna reinvest in more education, or you are gonna invest maybe different widgets that you need in order to be, more productive on your particular endeavor. Or if you have a business, a shop, a workshop, maybe you're an industrial, something like that, you're gonna invest on plant, property, and equipment, or maybe invest in marketing, and maybe most of these times, or some of these particular occasions, it's going to be man investing. However, at least you get a signal that that particular, piece of action, train of action, is going to be, of course, mistaken, but at least you are going to have the lesson of that. Meanwhile, when governments are doing the spending, and most of the time is an overspending or malinvestment, they don't learn the lesson because their cash flow, their revenue comes from, the taxpayer. So that's money is unearned, that's unearned money, because governments just finance through tax revenue and debt and hyperinflation sometimes. But okay, we're not going to get in this today. Anyway, So that doesn't affect their particular, productivity, because the productivity of the government comes from basically extracting resources from the private participants on an economy rather than on a productivity activity. In these particular cases, this happens when you have either natural disasters or you have wars that are considered a broken window fallacy, to say the least. When you have a natural disaster, for instance, the Katrina hurricane on Louisiana in the United States, or the nuclear disaster on Fukushima in Japan, and you have, of course, a bunch of these particular natural disasters that destroys a lot of GDP temporarily on those particular locations, especially on the regional locations where such event happen. Of course, in your first, you are going to have a bunch of aid that you need for the people, short time response. However, afterwards, you need to rebuild everything that was damaged, or at least partially, everything that it was damaged during this particular natural disaster, like roads, infrastructure, buildings, and also reestablish some businesses and that kind of thing that were severely affected during a particular natural disaster. And of course, after you have a particular dip, so you buy the dip, something like that, if you're a trader. And what happens is the GDP output just collapses on that particular location when the disaster occurs. However, you are going to see a slow recovery after the disaster thanks to spending, private spending, of course, in order to reinvest on such things, but most likely it will be public investment. Now, when you have a war conflict, a war zone, is even worse. Because what happens is when you have a war, of course, wars are very expensive on, of course, capital, resources, logistics, infrastructure, but also on human capital. You need to pay for supplies, you need to pay, of course, for temporary infrastructure, for gear and equipment that is very expensive in case of war. But the biggest thing is the human capital. You require thousands and thousands of people that have to be compensated. In most cases, they are better compensated than, let's say, an average citizen on a particular location. And that requires a lot on public spending in order to sustain just for a few days, a few months, let alone a war that extends for years, in order to keep implementing warfare strategies. But regarding economics and logistics, wars are very expensive. So you need a draconian public spending in order to keep sustaining these war conflicts. And of course, some companies get profits on these particular endeavors that I'm not going to mention the companies, most likely you already know that. But I mean, I'm talking every scenario in history that these particular companies that are manufacturers, suppliers, and that kind of thing, also they get, they get profitable. However, the rest of the economy most likely won't get profitable during a war situation. And the issue is that you are destining all of these particular resources on human capital and logistics and technology and that kind of thing, not for productive purposes. I mean, it's not benefiting the whole economy, but it's benefiting some people within the economy, usually powerful people on the economy. And that's why many times you have the incentives to, let's say, keep a war. Of course, you also have to mention the added cost that if, let's say, on particular scenarios in history, if you don't have if you lose that particular war, or at least you lose that a particular territory, a particular nation state that loses a war on the worst conditions for the economy afterwards, is going to have dire consequences as well. Now, the issue with Venezuela is that, of course, we saw an 80% GDP collapse, thanks to, of course, we already discussed the reasons, but the biggest thing is that it was not caused because of a war conflict. It was caused by, basically mismanagement and another reasons as well. But after an 80% GDP collapse, those particular collapses, you only see those during a war conflict, a war situation, and even then, it's not as draconian as an 80% GDP collapse. Anyway, now the Venezuelan economy started growing, still a long way to go, but one of the reasons is actually the broken window fallacy. Thanks to an 80% GDP collapse, basically the supply chain got destroyed, and right now we have a new supply chain in the country that is completely different from the one that we had on the past, and a lot of frictions and nuances that have to be sorted out. But meanwhile, right now, since 2019, the Venezuelan economy is growing, and is thanks partially to this new supply chain. And of course, we have the usual suspects that they are infrastructure, roads, buildings, and that kind of thing, and of course, human capital. So basically, we need to rebuild, let's call it like that, and then we need to rebuild the economy as a whole. And of course, that creates opportunities on this particular broken window fallacy that, of course, is not the most desirable, but it is what it is, already happened, and that creates the possibility, the opportunities on this particular process of, repairing some windows that you are going to have further and further economic growth for the next decade or so.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.